Good morning, everybody. Thanks ever so much for joining us. We are obviously in the middle of an unprecedented crisis, and unprecedented is certainly one of those words, along with things like furloughing and social distancing, that we never thought we'd be saying quite so much. But we are seeing huge changes week on week. The impact that that's having on us individually, as a business community, is huge, and we are definitely just at the start of that process and expecting to see a lot more changes over the coming weeks and months. So what at Pro Manchester we thought would be really useful to do is to bring together the chairs of our various sector committees to give a little bit of update into how the crisis has been affecting them, but also to give a little roundup on what they're seeing from their particular sector, give us a little bit of insight into how those businesses are coping and what they're seeing. We're then going to move in to look at kind of some of the more general concerns that we're seeing regardless of sector, and hopefully end on a few positives that we might be able to take away from coming through this crisis and out the other end. And I think it's really important that we do remember at some point this will end. We will go back to something resembling normality, although that might change slightly depending on everything that happens and how we react to it. So I'm going to start by just asking all the chairs to introduce themselves, and then we'll start going through those sector roundups. So I will now pass over to you, Caroline.
Hi there, sorry, just having a little bit of issue there, trying to make my camera work. My name's Caroline. I am Partnerships Manager for the charitable organisation Action Against Hunger. We are an international organisation leading the fight against child hunger, and we've been fantastically supported by the UK food and drinks industry for about 20 years. So we partner with them, we work hand in hand with them across the UK, very much so in and around Greater Manchester too.
Thanks, Caroline. Steve? I think you're just still on mute there, Steve.
Sorry, I was following the rules. Hi everyone, my name's Steve Kuncewicz. I'm co-chair of Creative Pro Manchester. I normally be talking to you about Nolan. And yeah, I think we see an awful lot of agencies and other clients that we work with still really getting to grips with things. We're 2 weeks in. Week 3 reality, I think, is starting to set in. So we're starting to have a lot of conversations around furloughing, around clients looking to pause contracts and issues in terms of keeping those relationships warm. I think now, as we were talking about before we started recording, reality is starting to set in. And that's why I think it's really important that we're having conversations like this to try and get some of the best information we can out to every sector, let alone the creative and digital. Thanks,
Steve. Kimberly?
Morning everyone, Kimberly Walden. I'm co-chair of the Fintech committee. I'm actually the owner, co-founder of a creative agency that specialises in fintech, so I recognise some of the things that Steve's saying, but today wanting to perhaps give some updates on what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from clients across the space, from payments providers to cybercrime specialists through to digital banks. So kind of here representing fintech rather than creative sector today.
Thanks, Kimberly. Suzanne?
Morning everyone, my name's Suzanne Benson. I am the co-chair of the Property and Regeneration Committee. I'm also the managing partner of the Trials and Hamlin's Manchester office. So I lead on the real estate side, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about what we're seeing both on the residential and the commercial side in terms of current activity and also what people are saying.
Thank you. Adam?
Hiya, I'm Adam Richmond. I'm chair of the Transport and Infrastructure Sector Group, and I'm also an associate with Mott MacDonald, a multidisciplinary engineering design firm. Seeing transport's kind of, we've got an immediate role to play in what's happening at the moment, but there are also some future concerns that I'll be sharing with you in a bit.
Thank you. Moving on to David.
Morning all, my name is David Stevenson. I am the chair lead for the sports committee. I'm also the sports lead at Padme, who are a leading mobile tech agency. Be interested to sort of hear what everyone's going through at the minute. Sports, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, is on lockdown at the minute and completely shut down, and clubs and teams, governing bodies are completely oblivious to what is going on. So I think it'll be good to have a conversation. Thank you.
Charlotte?
So I'm Charlotte Lewis. I'm a commercial lawyer at Mills & Reeves, specialising in health and health technology. I chair the Pro Manchester Healthcare Committee, and I also curate the One Health Tech Manchester Hub. Healthcare, as you can imagine, is incredibly busy sector at the moment. So I'm going to share some facts and some information about what's going on, and also talk about what the future of healthcare and the NHS might look like in this country.
Thank you. And then Wendy.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Hi, it's Wendy Smith, and I'm the co-chair of the Manufacturing Sector Committee. I work for ABGI. We are innovation funding specialists, and we help businesses from all different sectors, manufacturing being a big one, software and IT, and healthcare, predominantly with R&D claims, but we also assist with grants, capital allowances and patent box. And cash flow is a big issue to all businesses at the moment, and particularly the manufacturing sector. So that's what we're going to talk about, and our experience in talking with those guys and the challenges they're facing at the moment.
Thank you. And then last but not least, we have Sam.
Good morning, everybody. And for anyone who wasn't on earlier on, the reason that I'm on just on audio is I have been on call since 7 o'clock this morning, and I don't want to frighten any of you with the look of me quite right now. So I'm Sam. I'm the Chief Executive of Pro Manchester. Thank you all for coming together today. I think this is going to be really useful. You may or may not be aware that I sat on a variety of different sort of GM calls at the moment, specifically around the COVID-19. One of them being the GM representatives, so that's made up of it's chaired by the growth company, Mark Hughes, but it's made up of the Chamber of Commerce, the FSB, the regional IOD, the Northwest Business Leadership Team, and Andy joins in on those calls as well, and they're every Tuesday morning. The other one, which I've also sat on this morning, is the Economic Resilience Group, and that's a whole host of various different people from the local authorities, as well as some of the business representative organisations, and anyone who can feed into, and also the voluntary community. So trying to bring everybody together to try and sort of bridge that gap between the public and the private sectors. Now, the point of this obviously is to try and get a good handle on what are the key challenges, what are the key issues, so that we can feed them back up to the top, right into government, so that we can start making some fundamental changes to what's on offer at the moment. I mean, there's been a speedy response, but we're all aware that the devil is in the detail, and there is a lot more detail needed around some of these schemes and funds and grants. So there is a big push to get more information, but also identify where the gaps are, and the people and the businesses that are being missed off those lists, and who also very much need the support from government and the local authorities. So this group's really great for me, because I'd be really interested to hear what you've got to say, so that I can then feed that back into those calls.
Thanks ever so much, Sam. So we're now going to go around sector by sector to do some of those updates. As you may have noticed, we do have one fairly key sector missing this morning, which is our retail and e-commerce group. Kat from Grayling was hoping to be able to join us, but was unfortunately unable to do so this morning. However, what Kat and the team at Grayling Communications have produced is a really interesting report into how retailers and brands are responding, and that's something that will be circulating out through the Pro Manchester networks. But just a couple of key points to raise on there is retail and e-commerce have probably never been so split as they are right now. The bricks and mortar retailers, other than those selling essential products, so the pharmacies, the supermarkets, are pretty much closed. That is leading to a whole raft of different issues. The support's been there relatively quickly from government in rates relief, in the opportunity to be able to furlough staff and to try and protect that sector as best as possible. But there is then a huge knock-on impact as to what happens to the landlords of those buildings. We've already started to see a number of retailers looking at administration. It was a very, very difficult time for the high street before all of this came through, and it perhaps wasn't in the best position to be able to weather a crisis of this nature. However, on the e-commerce side, we were £2 billion up on the amount of money spent online. That is a phenomenal amount of money, but it's also a phenomenal amount of work. And we'll have seen the supermarkets in particular coming out and talking about the challenges that they have in being able to fulfil those online orders, in trying to identify the most vulnerable people and to be able to support. And one of the key trends that we're really seeing is that personalisation of brands. The ones that are coming out of this quite well are the ones that are having a very human response to that and saying, look, we're trying, we're doing our best, we're not going to get it all right, but this is what we're doing. They're being open, they're being honest, protecting their staff and trying to do the right thing by their customers. And I think it's fair to say that we've seen brands at the opposite end of that spectrum who are not going to come out of this well, that don't appear to be putting customers or staff first, and are getting quite a lot of negative press. And I think it will be quite interesting to see how those brands develop and change over the next few months. But also once we do start to get back to some kind of level of normality, how long our memory is going to be in the way that they handled this crisis. We are seeing the big retailers starting to get back to normal. The supermarkets very much saying, no, their supply chains are back in place. They're encouraging people to kind of go back to shopping more normally. We're hopefully over that panic buying phase, and that will start to even out. But clearly it is a sector that is going to feel the repercussions of this for some time. And I'm sure once we start getting on to kind of some of the property and transport updates, and we'll see the impact of some of that increase in e-commerce and decrease in footfall. So that's a kind of very quick retail update for you. And as I say, we will circulate round that more in-depth report from Grayling. But I'm now going to pass back over to Caroline to give us a bit of an update on the hospitality industry.
Thank you, Ilona. Well, obviously the hospitality industry is one of the industries that has been hit hardest by COVID, with obviously the closure of pubs, restaurants, bars, airports, everything, hotels, you can name it. And it's having one of the largest impacts. I was reading this morning that the amount of job losses that happened outweighs any other sector. Now, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, the government brought in the furloughing scheme, which has been fantastic to be able to keep people employed in these positions. The government is also announcing that hospitality, retail and leisure businesses across the UK, irrespective of their RV, will not have to pay business rates for 2001 tax year. And further action has been taken by the government to ensure that commercial property landlords cannot evict tenants for the next 3 months. But I think that there's all these measures been put in place by the government, which is great, but there is a lack of clarity around them. And there's lots of people scrabbling around to try and work out exactly what this all means. Obviously, everybody is a bit of a loss as to what to do at the moment. So it's a bit of a going into the unknown. And now we're kind of aware there's not going to be able to have this big party when we do finally come out of this. So it will be sort of a drip back effect going back into the world of hospitality. So there is concerns over what will happen once we're able to finally be able to go out and enjoy all these restaurants and bars and pubs and everything again, whether people will be willing to, will they want to, and how that will actually happen. It's all a big unknown. And of course, this also impacts travel, hotels as well. And just in addition to that, because obviously I come from a charitable background, and my link to the hospitality industry has been that Action Against Hunger and many other organisations who rely on fantastic supporters from the hospitality industry, we're being hit incredibly hard as well. So we're all at a bit of a loss at the moment, I have to say. But I have, later on when we talk about some positives, I do have some nice positive notes to come back to you with.
Excellent, thanks Caroline. Yeah, I think undoubtedly hospitality is one that is going to be hit both by the short-term measures and that kind of longer-term uncertainty. But yeah, and I'm sure you'll come on to this during the positives. There have been some incredible good news stories in the way that Manchester's trying to bounce back from some of that. So we will come on to that later. Steve, I'm just going to pass over to you now to give us a bit of an update on the creative and digital sector.
Yeah, so as we say very often, you know, creative and digital and media businesses face the same pressures that an awful lot of others do. You would hope that the perceived wisdom that good businesses don't stop marketing at times like this would mean that they're being more resilient. We're seeing a lot of work moving over onto brand rather than paid and other kinds of campaigns, an awful lot of times going on into brand at the minute. And we've seen an awful lot of bigger clients having the discussion around whether or not they can pause a campaign or pause a relationship, pause a contract. They're having to have some quite, you know, frank discussions with them on that side of things. What we are saying to businesses is, you know, this could well be the new golden age of contract management, in that it's more important now than ever to stay close to your clients and build a relationship with them, because if you do make a decision that you are willing to scale back support for a little while, you're going to need them on the other side of all of this, however many months that's going to be. Other than that, we're seeing a lot of talk around the furlough scheme and how it works. I was on a webinar before this that suggested that some of the money is already starting to come through from the government, but I've yet to see any real evidence of that. And like everyone else has been saying, we just need, I think this section just needs a lot more detail on how furloughing works in practice. So we've been working with clients on that constantly since all this kicked off. Discussions around whether or not COVID-19 constitutes force majeure, which are an act of God that would mean that a contract could be paused or terminated. We have a lot of those discussions. But as I say, an awful lot of work still being done around brands purposeful at times like this, addressing client needs. And as Kimberly was saying before, as everybody was saying before, making sure that they're saying the right kind of things so that on the other side of this, brands and advertisers and the community in general are sort of seen as an enabler rather than just taking advantage of it. So it's accelerated a couple of discussions around whether or not agencies want to be leaning heavily on data-driven campaigns when that's a bit more risky anyway, in the onset of GDPR and other regulation. But like I said, I think we're into week 3. The reality is starting to set in that this is going to be here to stay. Lots of questions about furloughing, lots of questions about how the business interruption loan scheme is going to work. I think a lot of people are finding that it's very similar to any other kind of loan you take out at any other kind of time. I think maybe the bloom's off the rose of the government's initial announcements as to how all of this financial support is going to work. Certainly, there's a massive freelance community within the creative, digital and marketing sector that's benefited from the Chancellor's more recent announcements. But yeah, relationships and people and campaigns, I think, are at the heart of the issues that we're dealing with right now.
Thanks, Steve. And I think it's something that we've chatted about a few times when we look at the creative and digital sector, is just the breadth of different businesses that are in there, everything from freelancers, people part freelance, part employed, through to your large scale agencies. And obviously the way that these support packages work is going to be hugely different across all of those different businesses. So I don't envy your job in trying to piece it all together. I think as much as everyone is kind of looking to the government to kind of say, this is how we're dealing with it and these are all the packages, people quite naturally are turning to their advisors and wanting all of that support and advice. And across our membership, we're seeing some incredible work going on to try and distill all of that. But ultimately, we're only in week 3. It's not tried, it's not tested. We're all kind of fighting to get that clarity to be able to support people. So staying within the tech sector, but more specifically on fintech, I'm going to pass over to Kimberly.
Hi, just really quickly, based on what Steve said, I'm just feeling very fortunate at the moment that we are in the fintech space and that we are so specialist. Please excuse if you can hear a screaming 1-year-old in the background. It's actually been nice getting to know a lot of people's children in the last few weeks. But I guess the fintech space, what I'm seeing from our clients is that they're kind of following it sounds logical, they're following what's happening in the sectors that they serve. So we're kind of split. So you're seeing kind of big enterprise-sized payments organisations that are making blanket cuts because the majority of their income comes from terminal business. And then we're seeing smaller, more agile kind of medium-sized fintechs that are still heavily funded. So they're profitable, but they're still heavily funded for growth. So they're not really seeing the impact because a lot of their finances are still kind of subsidized. They're going through like a Series A funding. So there's a real mix from businesses that are kind of public that are having to make cuts because their share prices have gone through the floor. We've got businesses that are still going through funding rounds that are still funded, that are just hell for leather. You know, they're seeing opportunities if they can to plan for cash flow issues, but they are, you know, at large staying the same. And then we've got businesses in sectors like the kind of fraud prevention and cybersecurity that are seeing this as, for, you know, want of a better word, an opportunity. And we're there, you know, advising them that, you know, we're not ambulance chasing. All the messaging, anything that's coming out of this space has to be about social benefit. Not necessarily corporate social responsibility, but just something that has to, any messages have to come out that benefit the society at the moment. So it's a little bit of a mix. We have seen some organisations, some fintechs that want to, you know, reduce the amount of activity. But to be honest, at the sector at the moment, without going into detail about the positives, a lot of them serve, the ones that serve e-commerce, digital goods, gaming, that kind of side of things, they seem to be really, really flourishing. The ones that are serving the retail, hospitality and travel space, which is, you know, many of them are struggling and are planning. What I'm hearing from, I've had calls with the kind of leadership team at all of our clients in the last 2 weeks, and what I'm hearing from everybody is that in their kind of forward planning, they've got a 3-month kind of point where they're aiming to maintain normality, or a 3-month point where if it gets past that, it's going to get kind of really serious. So that I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I've got quite a few positives coming out of the fintech space, but I can save them. But at the moment, the fintech space is kind of mirroring what's happening in the sectors that they serve, and the businesses that are funded and not dependent on revenue are still doing quite well. There's not, so far, not too many specific initiatives that that are impacting the kind of agile fintech space. So business as usual as best they can for the time being. I know that Mark, who's the co-chair of the fintech space, he left some notes because he couldn't make it today to you and myself, Ilona, and he was saying the same, that he's not really seeing an impact in the fintech sector as far as his clients go, other than kind of the same, you know, some businesses starting to furlough staff in preparation for what might happen if this goes on for a long time. And that's not, obviously not talking about the banks and kind of lending space. This is purely kind of the fintech market.
Thanks ever so much, and I think it's worth noting just how strong Manchester's fintech sector is. It's something that as a sector group we launched new last year. We've been kind of overwhelmed but with the appetite of people wanting to take part in that space. Whitecap Consulting and Fintech North have just released a report showing that we do have the biggest fintech community outside of London, and it is a little odd one that, having been that absolute speed through as kind of this untouchable sector, that, as you say, some of those bigger players are being impacted differently. And I think it's also a reminder of just how intertwined all of our sectors are. I think we quite often do sector specific events. I know at the start of this call I was kind of introducing chairs to each other, because although I see all of you on a very regular basis, people can very much work within those sectors and not see the impact of the advisory community on a particular sector, and how kind of the success of one impacts the other. And I think that perhaps is one of the positives of what we're going through at the moment, is that everyone is impacted by the same issue, and it enables us to work a little bit more closely and collaboratively together. So I'm just going to pass on now to Suzanne for the property update.
Thanks. I think, like everyone else, it's very much a developing picture at the moment. An awful lot of the bigger Northwest deals were working up to year end for the public sector, and an awful lot of our deals in the Northwest do have a public sector element. So what we've seen is a lot of people putting a lot of effort in to try and get a lot of those deals over the line mid last week. So to an extent, that activity just continued, notwithstanding everyone suddenly was doing it from home. Not all of those deals went through. I think the work my team was on, probably about 50-50. A number did fall at the last hurdle just because people got a bit nervous, to be honest, to make such big commitments. And around that time, we also had more guidance come out of the government on things like conveyancing practice, what is expected of people in terms of house moves, how properties can be valued, even things as basic as how local authorities can carry out searches, all of which are things which affect the entire property industry, whether it's residential or commercial. So we are seeing, and will continue to see while this initial period goes on, a slowdown, because transactional work inevitably is going to be impacted by those kind of things. We've had a large number of house builders close sites, and I know there's been a lot of discussion in the press about where the builders should be carrying on building. And I think there's two sides to that argument, because it is to an extent keeping the economy going and they can't work from home, but it isn't necessarily helping with that flattening the curve. So that's generating a lot of discussion. Our construction team are very, very busy advising on contractual remedies, rights, what people are signed up to, what approach they can take. And similarly, a lot of our clients have large portfolios of assets to manage, whether that's residential, whether that's commercial. So they're looking very closely at how they can continue to manage those assets. So how they can carry out safety checks, how they can access properties, what on the commercial side, what they can do about tenants who can no longer afford to pay their rents. There's a lot of activity at the moment about how that's managed over this short-term period. And then people, I think the good thing about this, I think people are starting to look forward, and I think there is a lot more discussion going on about how things will look. You've mentioned retail. There is going to be an ongoing discussion about whether that will change looking forward, whether our use of offices will change looking forward, as we've all just been forced to demonstrate we can work from home. So we're seeing some of those discussions going on, and also people trying to continue where they can, keeping projects bubbling on as we have this bit. So particularly about public sector elements, so I can tell they're being encouraged to carry on things going. We're seeing things coming out of Homes England, for example, where they are being very positive to push projects forward where work can be done, which isn't perhaps on site. And that's what a lot of our teams are involved in at the moment. So I think, depending on how long this lasts, we will see that continuing. So people are aiming to be ready to get things moving again, to get back on site.
Thanks, Suzanne. And a very kind of closely linked industry there, we're just going to pass over to Adam to talk about the transport and infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I guess there's two angles to come at this from. So the immediate is, what has this big close down done for transport? So Greater Manchester, we've seen a 95% reduction in the use of Metrolink, which is huge. That's now on a 20-minute timetable. We've had an 80 to 85% reduction in the use of buses. Roads is about 45%. But I guess if you think about, deliveries are still happening, freight, etc., movement, etc. So not unexpected. One thing that I find quite interesting is that no one's really picked up on is that, did you know the government's taken over the running of the railways entirely in this time? So it's not been reported widely, but yeah, the government's got control over all of the franchises and have run out new timetables for everybody. And if you look at the West Coast Main Line, there's only one train per hour now between Manchester and London. Down from the 5 or 6 that there were before. I think more generally in the in terms of transport projects that we've got going on, all but essential work has stopped. There's still a lot of railway work going on. It's probably a fairly good time whilst it's quiet, and railway workers are classed as key workers at the moment. I think procurement has stalled, so there are a number of projects with Transport for Greater Manchester, for instance, who they've just put a pause on any investment in those for the time being, but looking to get back up to speed before the summer. And also we've seen a commitment from government to paying suppliers faster. So there's a big cash flow issue with a lot of companies in the sector at the moment. So the commitment from government to pay faster is welcome. I think if we look to the future, I think there's an awful lot of money been committed by the government to, to prop up various industries and help people through this time. And I think there's always a spotlight is shone on infrastructure investment in the future. So I think whilst we might not be seeing a downturn in what we're doing at the moment, really, we feel that there's a bit of pain in the post that we're going to receive sometime later next year, where budgets are slashed and whatever. But at the moment, we're all kind of focusing on the projects that we've got in hand that can be delivered that perhaps aren't out on site. I think another interesting conversation which will happen, as Suzanne mentioned, was the number of people that are going to be using offices. Are we going to have the same numbers of commuters in the future? And we've got business cases for very large schemes being made at the moment, where we're assuming that people kind of carry on as normal, or as the old normal, where people would want to commute. I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be the case. We've proven to everybody that working from home is actually not too difficult on the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Adam and I have joked a little bit about this before, as to kind of, if there's a silver lining here, it's potentially not having to do that slightly horrific commute in and out of Manchester.
I've got a quick stat on that, actually. So before all this started, the performance measure that we've got on the railways was 76.3% of trains essentially turned up on time, weren't cancelled. That's now at 100%.
So there we go. All we need to do is not use the trains, and we're absolutely fine. But yeah, absolutely, as you say, it's one of those things that we've looked at, is that amount of time and effort and stress that people spend commuting on a daily basis. Are we actually more productive at home? Are people happier working from home? And how reluctant are people potentially going to be to go back to a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 in an office, rather than asking for more flexibility? And that was certainly a trend that we were seeing before all of this started. So to go from kind of transport that's almost business as usual on big projects, but expecting a slowdown in the long term, I'm going to pass over to David to do sport, which saw a kind of a very dramatic stop all in one go.
Yeah, I think the sports side of things at the minute is very, very interesting. Sport, in a way, is trying to find its place with where they can go with things. You look at sort of the Premier League, for example. They've postponed everything till sort of, I think, June time. English football leagues till June. There's a lot of discussion around legal possibilities, media rights, etc., and could this be extremely costly? Richard Masters, the CEO of the Premier League, came out today to say that this could cost the Premier League just short of £1 billion, this break that we're having currently. And then obviously moving into next year. Big competitions have been postponed as well, from the likes of the Olympics. You've got the European Championships, which was due to be held in London this summer, which would, from a whole different kind of sector, hospitality, hotels, travel, etc., is going to cost everyone a lot of money. Wimbledon's also now being postponed, and recently this week the Golf Open was postponed. Sport really, I think, is one of those things that touches every area of every sort of sector. If you look at sport, and the one thing that we're talking to a lot of guys, and ladies that we're talking about at the minute, not only here in the UK but over in the US, is how things have affected other areas. So we spoke to the National Hockey League over in the US recently, and they're currently looking at their season, where they're going to be going and what they're going to be doing. And one thing that came up in the conversation was mental health. And it wasn't only down to mental health of the players, coaches and backroom staff. It was actually the fans as well, who are fiercely loyal to their teams, and that every Saturday, Sunday or Tuesday, Wednesday evening that they go and watch their teams, it becomes part of their life. And without that sort of stream of news, or sort of stream of being able to watch their favourite team play, they started to see a real effect on some of their players. I think there's a couple of players recently been in the news that have had their wrists slapped for being naughty, or I think an old teammate of mine suggested they were just bored, which, if you're sat in your mansion, I don't know whether to feel sorry for them or not. There are a few things that I think, from a positive point of view, that have come to the forefront, which is esports. Now, I know obviously the sports symposium that we had earlier in the year, Esports was a bit that we discussed, and it was a really interesting point. But I'm not sure if any of you tuned in. Obviously, the Formula One had their first virtual Grand Prix on Sunday. I watched it for the first time and thoroughly enjoyed it. You also had Aintree, the sort of Grand National, which had 4.8 million viewers and raised £2.6 million for the NHS. One thing that we're talking to at the minute, one client of ours, Sale GP, who we're talking to, is esports now going to be moved to the forefront of people's minds? Previously, before that, it was very much, well, don't you just sit on your backside and is it, it's not really sport. But esports now has become one of the most viewed things on Sky Sports, ESPN, because that's what people can engage with immediately. And that's something that we're really concentrating on at the minute, is what can we do from that point? A partner of ours, Tata Communications, are actually sort of heavily working on the networks to keep the likes of Twitch and all these other services moving forward. So it's really interesting time. I think that the main thing for me really is mental health. I think it's something that's not been discussed yet, but I think people don't understand, I think, the effects on some supporters. I coach a non-league football team, and we are trying our best to stay in touch with a lot of our fans at the minute, because some of them are elderly, some of them are young, some live at home. What are they doing on a Saturday now? Are they, sort of just stuck in at home on their own? What can we do? So we're trying different methods. I know Everton and Liverpool Football Club recently did a great scheme where they video called all their supporters, or the majority of the ones that they felt were vulnerable. And I think sport is now slowly starting to step up to where it needs to be. I think there was very much confusion of sport can carry on, we're in our own bubble. And I think the recent headlines with a certain football club over on Merseyside have kind of cemented the fact that sport probably is in its own bubble and sometimes doesn't look outside of that bubble. But what was great to see was that they listened to the fans and they listened to people in the media about, hang on, reverse that decision quickly. It's great that the Manchester clubs haven't done what that Merseyside club have done. I think that really shows, and they're pumping a lot of money into the local homeless schemes, communities, etc. And I think sport now is starting to really take hold of what they should be doing and what their responsibility is. And I think hopefully it carries on, but we'll see.
Thank you. Yeah, mental health has been quite high on the agenda and Pro Manchester generally certainly over the last year or so. We've seen more and more companies interested in corporate well-being and the mental health of employees and taking kind of some responsibility for that. And I think that link between physical health and mental health is starting to be understood a lot more. And kind of one of the things that we are seeing from the government as these social restrictions are put in place is that real encouragement to still get outside, to have that daily exercise where it's possible and where it's safe, because as much as we talk about the Premier League and that kind of elite level sport, there's a huge amount of grassroots football, people going out playing in the park, whether that's teenagers playing with friends, all the way through to kind of different groups that might meet up socially and do that, that's been taken away. I'm just about to pass over to Charlotte, who's chair of our healthcare committee, but one of the things that we have spoken about at some length within the group is around that mental health care. So whilst there's obviously a huge amount of focus on what the healthcare industry is doing to combat the virus specifically, with kind of new initiatives taking place, and there is also a real sense on how do we protect people who have potentially become more vulnerable to that kind of loneliness and isolation and seeing some different mental health needs. So I'll just pass over to you now, Charlotte, for the healthcare update.
So, I mean, I think everybody knows the healthcare and the social care, for that matter, sectors are incredibly busy. In this crisis, they are absolutely the front line, and our health and social care staff are quite literally putting their lives on the line in order to look after those of us that are sick. And it's great to see the country, and in fact other countries as well, of course, all recognising the efforts that the health and social care staff, and that's all staff as well. I saw on the news this morning some appreciation for 2 workers in hospitals who are cleaners. So it's right the way through the system. They're all exposed to this virus in exactly the same way, and yeah, it's continued to go to work and do their bit. So it's incredible. to see that. Just wanted to highlight a couple of things that most people will probably be aware of really in the sector, but particularly in the Northwest. So obviously we've got the Northwest Nightingale Hospital due to open next week. That hospital is different. It's a different model to the sort of the first one that was opened in London. It's a step down facility as opposed to a sort of mass ICU. And that has been determined to be the best solution for the Northwest by the sort of NHS managers who'd come to that decision. They feel that the hospitals have got sufficient capacity and the right equipment to provide ICU treatment, and that the best use of that extra space would be step down capacity. Some other capacity has been generated by on a national basis by the procurement of independent sector beds as well. So I work with a number of independent sector hospitals as well as the NHS sector, NHS, and the regions are utilising that extra capacity to suit. Some are using it for extra intensive care, and others are using it to deal with other urgent but non-COVID related matters, for example, urgent cancer. And that brings me on to something I wanted to flag in relation to a sort of unintended consequence of this that's starting to come out in the press, which is that, of course, the COVID-19 is not the only virus, and certainly the consequences of that are not the only illness in this country, and there are still heart attacks, strokes, there's still cancer, and many other appendicitis. There's lots of other acute and chronic illnesses that will continue, and people are not using their doctors for either because they're too busy or for fear of I suppose of getting the infection, or just not wanting to be a burden on the system. And I think the message is coming out from the centre now to be absolutely clear that if you are at risk or you're having a stroke or a heart attack or something like that, you absolutely should use the NHS as you usually would, and certainly not not stop yourself from doing so for any reason. There's been clearly a huge uptake in the purchase and use of medical equipment, not least ventilators, oxygen use, masks, that sort of thing, and also the use of technology in the sector. Those who know me know I'm particularly interested in digitisation and the use of technology within the sector, and we've been sort of jumping up and down for a few years, talking about a digital first approach and digital front door to the health service, and whilst that's it's coming along and it's taking time, and it was seeming to get there. Actually, in the last few weeks, pretty much all general practice has gone digital, and the likelihood that it will remain. So people certainly talking about digital as default for primary care and potentially for secondary care, sort of post treatment, post op sort of work. A couple of issues I wanted to flag that are very pertinent and that people are aware though, and think things that will continue to be investigated going forward. So there's clearly a shortage. There's always been a shortage of staff in the NHS. It's great so many people have come forward, but that's to fill an urgent need. After all of this, there will continue to be workforce issues, I've no doubt. So we need to continue to think about that. And then two things that are very likely to be the subject of public inquiry going forward are in relation to PPE, public protective equipment, and testing, and the apparent lack of testing as compared to other countries, most notably Germany.
Thanks, Charlotte. And yeah, I think that's a really clear distinction to have. Is partly how the healthcare system is responding to this particular crisis, and whether we've done what we should, when we should, and how we deal with that. And obviously some fantastic examples such as Manchester Central stepping up to be the new hospital, but equally a reminder that all the rest of the NHS is still going on, and it was in a difficult situation already, around kind of the workforce issues, things coming out around waiting times, all that kind of thing. And I think that is a really important message to come through. We hear the stay home, save lives message over and over again, which is phenomenally important and absolutely the best thing that we can be doing. with the caveat that if you still need the NHS, if you still need that emergency port, that is still there. And obviously the last thing that we want to see come out of this is that people with those incredibly serious conditions are not coming forward and seeking the support that they need. So thanks ever so much for flagging that very human side to the issue for us as well. And so I'm going to pass over for our final sector update to Wendy.
Oh, right. OK, so most of the manufacturing companies' issues are at the moment are focused around the short-term and medium-term impact of COVID-19. The single biggest issue at the moment is cash flow and funding. Most companies are mindful that they will have a real challenge in funding their business through this period. Our own experience with the R&D claims is that businesses are still paying us for doing their claims, fortunately, but we feel that going forward there's going to be an impact for them being able to complete their claims and get the funding back to keep them going and innovating. There's interruptions to companies' supply chains. So even companies that are seen as essential businesses are having issues with manufacturing supplies of components, as some of them own suppliers. Some of their own suppliers have been required to close. In terms of COVID-19 challenge, the issue for manufacturers is around designing new ventilators using components that they know they can source or can easily manufacture within the UK. Companies manufacturing PPE for healthcare workers have been struggling to get supplies of the raw materials needed and also get staff able to cut materials. Sourcing vital components, sourcing new suppliers in the current climate isn't easy, and it's not just about the furlough. There are a lot of people who are deciding they want to stay at home, but their companies are staying operational, but on a really short-staffed. Challenges, even challenging in the retooling machine shops to manufacture required parts. They're all facing that as a difficulty too. It's all around the staffing and who's available to be able to help on the projects, and retraining staff to build new products they haven't previously experienced with. So they're trying to build things that they haven't previously done, and they're trying to work out how to do that and design new manufacturing process and assembly lines. One very positive I'll save my positive outcomes for later. Another big challenge for companies, most companies have seen their demand fall off a cliff in the last 3 weeks. Other than food processors, personal health, farmers and the usual suspects. So even in companies can continue to trade, they may well not have anyone to buy products. So major interruptions along with the value chain from raw material supplies to component supplies to a shortage of skilled and experienced operators in factories to end consumers. So it's all about trying to get everybody to coordinate with each other so that things can still happen. There have been some serious challenges amongst the food processing companies who are looking for more staff to meet the increased demands from panic buyers. So there are quite a few companies advising us last week that they were looking to employ 200 to 300 additional staff. So you might see that as an upside to it, that there are recruitment actually happening out there, but because it's being driven by the environment that we're working in. And then my other points are on the positive side, so I'll save those for you till later.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wendy, and thanks everybody for your updates. It's been really interesting for me to kind of understand the range of different impacts that this is having. We were going to kind of mention concerns as a separate point, but I think we've actually covered those off quite well as we've been going through. Everyone shared the kind of particular concerns of their sectors. And I think just to draw some of those themes together, we're seeing the personal impact, so around obviously the fear of the virus itself, but very particularly around kind of the mental health issues around isolation, not having that usual interaction, whether that's with friends, family, with your sporting clubs. and a real difference in the impact of sectors depending on what part they play within our society, that we're seeing some such as e-commerce and areas of manufacturing such as food processing having that we simply cannot resource the amount of demand that we're having. We can't rely on supply chains in the same way, through to potentially some of the things around the bigger construction, the transport, where at the moment we're kind of cracking on business as usual, but with a very definite eye on what's going to happen further down the line. And I think what we can't kind of overstate is just the impact that the uncertainty is having at every single level. Through absolutely nobody's fault, we do not know what this is going to look like in a few weeks' time. We don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know what that exit strategy is going to be. And for individuals, that's difficult to cope with, to know how long we're going to have these restrictions for, but also for the business community and the kind of the market as a whole, that uncertainty is really difficult. So we are going to move on to some of the positives, because there are some real positives in that, and I think that's a good place for us to start. And Greater Manchester is there, so I'm just going to pass over to Sam, because I think you're probably closest to some of those Greater Manchester initiatives and some of the wonderful ways our region's pulling together.
Brill. Okay, fine. Sorry, I thought we were kind of going to miss my sort of slot, if you like, with regards to sort of updates.
Sam, don't worry.
That's fine. I mean, I'm very conscious of time, and it is now 11:01. So I'm going to keep this fairly quick. Now, a lot of you have touched on quite a few of the things that are being discussed at that GM local level. Specifically, on the call this morning, John Rathmore from the Combined Authority talked about the Greater Manchester Chamber's weekly business monitor, which just has a look and sort of monitors the business sentiment. Now, there's some fairly eye-watering statistics in there with regards to employment and workforce, into business confidence, and as Wendy had mentioned, the customer demand and various other things like that as well. So I'll share that link with you. It doesn't make for the best reading, but it's, at least it's giving us an indication of where businesses are at and where the economy is going and what is happening, so that we can keep an eye on that and obviously act accordingly. With regards to the calls, so the key issue at the moment that's sort of the main focus is about cash flow, which I know somebody did mention earlier. And a need to get that money out to the businesses as soon as possible through the various different funds and grants. So whether that's through the furlough schemes, or whether that's through the business rates relief, or whether that's through the loan schemes as well. There is a lot of movement from the local authorities on that the money is going out there, but there is also a bit of a backlog with regards to one of the local authorities, for example, has over 3,000 applications to get through. So it's just a matter of actually the infrastructure and just having the resource and the time to get through all of these queries and also get that money out to the businesses. But it is absolutely 100% the priority. There is still a little bit confusion, and I know that the Combined Authority are working with the local authorities with regards to to the eligibility for some of the businesses, and also the ones that do fall through the gaps, the ones that don't qualify. A real push with government to really open up and widen the net of some of those schemes, so that some of those businesses, those gaps, they don't fall through the gaps. There's also a huge piece around the sort of the communications as well, which is being really pushed there to make sure that businesses can really understand whether they do qualify, whether they don't qualify, and if they don't qualify, the other options that are available to them. So just making sure that there's some real clarity as to what businesses can and can't access. There's also a lot of talk around the job retention scheme. Obviously, at the moment, one of the issues is as much as it's welcomed, it doesn't allow employees to work, which for some businesses actually, although it's it would be great to put the people on the furlough, they do actually need the resource in the business to keep the business moving forward. So all of those sorts of conversations are happening. As Ilona also mentioned, I think about the mental health. Andy Burnham and Sir Richard Leese launched a range of new services for people who are feeling the impacts of isolation and that ranges from various different degrees to the children to adults to furloughed employees, etc., etc. So again, we can circulate that if you haven't already seen what's available there, because it's useful we want to try and push that out to as many people as possible. The next big thing, and I would welcome very much any input you might want to drop me on an email, is I have a call tomorrow which is specifically looking at business recovery. So although we've been sort of firefighting recently, dealing with the initial crisis, there is now a look to that medium to long term view, and actually how do we look at returning back to, as I think Ilona said before, some sort of normality, and what that looks like. And that's with across the fact that some of the businesses won't be here anymore. Without continued support, they won't be able to survive. And also looking at obviously returning in people back to employment, and how that is managed and monitored. So or anybody, if you've got anything that you would like me to filter into that, particularly that business recovery piece, please send it to me before midday tomorrow, and I can feed that into that conversation tomorrow.
Thanks ever so much, Sam. And I think the way that all those various organisations are coming together in Greater Manchester, we had a really good foundation in place that when something like this hit, those calls, those meetings were going on, albeit less frequently than they have been over the last few weeks. But that real joined up approach, I think, is really positive. And whilst a number of things that you mentioned there, that they're difficult topics and they might not make for the best reading, it's really reassuring to know that we are pulling all those strands together and making that advice available as widely as possible. So just going to finish up then, if anyone does have a couple of quick positives that they want to throw out there, and then we'll bring everything to a close.
I think mainly from if it's all right, Ilona, mainly from the agencies that we work with, the one positive that's coming out of this is that it's forcing a lot of the more difficult discussions that I think some businesses have been putting off for a while, around the resilience, around the cash flow, around the kind of work they do, around where they see themselves in the market. That's obviously not going to make any discussions easy around furloughing staff or where the work's going to come from. But I think they're already starting to focus on, like I said before, what comes after all of this. And we've seen some agencies make it very clear that actually they're going to keep staff on full time. They're not going to furlough if they possibly can do. So they're making sort of midterm decisions as opposed to very short term knee jerk ones. I think that's if nothing else comes out of that, then that's positive.
Thanks. And then I'm going to go finally to Caroline for the positive update. I'm just appreciative of people's time on this call, but it is something that we can obviously revisit to draw out some more of those positives. So final positives from you, Caroline.
Yes, well, thank you. I think hospitality is stepping up and doing what it does best, and being hospitable to as many people as possible. We've seen so many dark kitchens cooking food for key workers, for homeless people, etc., which is incredible. Hotels opening their doors for free to NHS workers, to homeless people again, and then a load of new initiatives getting there. You would have seen Sacha Lord and his team putting together loads of really interesting people from around Greater Manchester and beyond to do online anything. There's been even DJ gigs and cook-alongs and all sorts. And I think that one of the main things that's come out of this, which is super positive, is that not only are we seeing like how brilliant the hospitality sector can be, but also it's a really key time for those fantastic hospitality individuals to be able to keep on to their brand loyalty and their customer loyalty by showing them just how resilient they are in their worst possible time. And just from a charitable perspective, I work for an international charity, so we've been hit hardest because obviously people are thinking about donating their money to the most immediate needs, so the NHS, for example. How incredible that the UK population is raising millions and millions of pounds where it's needed. And I also, a small bit of positivity, I feel that once we are over the worst in the UK or in the West, there will be an understanding like never before from our generation to really know how it feels, or to have that fear of not being able to have food, to not being able to go out. All of those things will have a connection to people in countries for whom this is a daily ongoing basis. So I think that we might not see it quite yet, but I think in months, years to come, I really think that there are some positives that will come out of it.
Absolutely, and I think it was on one of your blogs, Caroline, that kind of reminds us that actually social distancing is a privilege. And I think now, as ever, is a really good time to kind of look at what we have around us. And whilst it is a difficult time and we're isolated and we're frightened and it's not business as normal, we still have a huge amount to be grateful for. And that is something that hopefully will stay with us as we come out the other side. So I'm going to draw all the discussion to a close now. Just wanted to thank all of you again for your time. It's been lovely for me to be able to see all your faces again, despite being in slightly different circumstances. As I say, there's been a huge amount of issues brought up over the course of this call. We will look to set up some more virtual roundtables and some webinars, and I know that we didn't get onto all of the positives, so we'd hugely encourage everybody to send through any of those kind of case studies, those positive stories. We very much do want to keep sending all of those out. So I'm just going to stop the recording now and say thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you, everybody.